Hello, my name is Mark Clements, and I am a Chicago police torture survivor in the city of Chicago. Back in 1981, June the 25th, I was arrested and taken down the Violent Crimes Unit. Area 3 Violent Crimes Unit is located 3900 on South California Avenue, and it still exists this day. It is a police station that basically is a juvenile intervention center for youth. Being at Area 3 Violent Crimes, I witnessed a man by the name of Tommy Jackson brutalized by police. And watching Tommy Jackson become brutalized by members of the Chicago Police Department, shortly thereafter, I was placed inside of a small interrogation room, the size of a closet, and I was basically confronted with a police officer that identified himself as John McCann, star number 8137. John McCann was a detective that appeared to be a alcoholic. My first encounter with John McCann was inside of a police station washroom in which I witnessed him drinking alcohol. Later that evening, John McCann entered inside of this very small interrogation room, and he began to question me about a arson fire that had occurred on June in the city of Chicago at 6600 South Wentworth, in which four people had died. I knew nothing about the fire, despite the fact that I had been basically picked out by a person by the name of Ramona Patton. Ramona allegedly told police that she knew me from the neighborhood and that her associates had identified me and had allegedly stated that uh, she heard rumors from the neighborhood that I had started this fire. Police brought me into police custody. I was denied my parents at the age of 16 years of age. I was denied a youth officer, and I was basically at the mercy of members of the Chicago Police Department. I was basically at the mercy of, man, a criminal justice system that literally, really gave no due diligence to a child and to hold me into police custody incommunicado of my parents. It just basically describes the torture of these police officers. I began to get hit in my arms. I was basically called a nigger boy and punched in my chest, being beat across my legs. And as I lowered my body to try to protect this cop from striking me in my face, uh, he would hit me in my back area to try to cause me to raise up. Well, I make it very clear, and I made it clear from the outset of this particular case that while in police custody, children knew how to guard their faces. And, they knew basically how to balled up into a fetus position. And, inside of this interrogation room, both of my hands were handcuffed. The detective placed a chair directly in front of me. That was to prevent my legs from moving up. And what he began to do was to use racial epithets and calling me little nigger boy, little nigger motherfucker. And, the bottom line of it is that he, during the course of this beating, uh, grabbed my genitals and testicle area and began to squeeze. There are so many of us all across this country. We pay little regard to the fact that children are very vulnerable individuals. And when taken down to police stations, safeguards were placed intact to ensure that their safeguards would be held at least so that they would not be victimized. Well, I was victimized. I had my genitals and my testicles grabbed and squeezed. They were squeezed, in which this detective was basically saying, "You're going to you're going to cooperate, right? You're going to cooperate, right? You're going to cooperate." As he was squeezing harder and harder and harder. Yes, I did agree. This detective then, therefore, began to write down certain details about this crime that he wanted me to repeat to a man that he had identified me that would be wearing a suit that would come inside of the interrogation room. Well, this man did come inside the interrogation room and he identified himself as being an attorney on the behalf of the people. Well, my education level at that particular time did not allow me to fully comprehend what representing the people meant. And I looked at myself as being a person. Well, I told this man after he had unpacked some of his belongings out of a suitcase. One of the pieces of material that he had taken out was a video. It was a video recording. And that video recording, it just clearly uh, it was used to basically take my confession. Well, I told him from the outset that I did this crime and that I had been beaten and that my parents had not been contacted by members of the Chicago Police Department. He immediately packed his belongings back into this suitcase and he exited the interrogation room. From where I was sitting, I could see that he had now begun to join into a conversation that police officers were having outside of the interrogation room. Whatever he told them, he ended up leaving or appearing to leave. Um, I would say approximately 5 or maybe 10 minutes later, Officer John McCann returns back to the interrogation room and he begins to once again beat me again in my arms, across my legs, hitting me in the chest, this time actually making contact with the face, calling me little nigger boy and accusing me of trying to get him into trouble with his boss. What he then did was he grabbed this same chair that he had been sitting in. And what he did do, he put it back in front of my legs and began to beat me in similar fashion as to how I described it the first time. Keep in mind that this is the year of 1981 in the city of Chicago. Keep in mind that we're talking about a 16-year-old. We're talking about a 16-year-old that now is accused of a very, very serious offense in the city of Chicago. Um, as he was beating me, and calling me little nigger boy and basically doing everything in his power to basically break me. That did not occur until once again he grabbed in between my legs and he began to squeeze. And, you know, this was a tactic and a method used by most Chicago police officers back in that particular era. It was basically they would round up black and brown young men or women and take them behind a schoolyard or behind one of those like metro train tracks, and they would brutalize them. Generally, the police officers had tactics in which they would place the person in back of their squad car and to drop them off into what was considered to be opposite gang territory. Well, once having my genitals and testicles grabbed and squeezed this second time, I began to cry. I then, therefore, agreed to cooperate. Well, I was someone that grew up believing that you had to work. And I did have little hustle jobs, and I sold tissy rolls over at Operation Push. Every Saturday, I would see the Reverend Jesse Jackson, and he would enter into the church building to give his Saturday morning forms. And I remember that he would always tell us to keep hope alive and to, you know, just be strong, you know, stay in school, don't be no fool. And in my young, tender mind, I said, well, if I cooperate, then therefore, what I would do is I would go to Jesse Jackson. I would tell Jesse Jackson what took place. And as a result of telling Jesse Jackson what took place, I would therefore urge him to at least take my situation to a African American reporter at that time by the name of Russ Ewing. Russ was a reporter in which people had some confidence in, and they turned themselves into Russ, in which Russ would take them down to the police station, basically documenting their appearance before he turned them over to members of the Chicago Police Department. Well, I confessed, and in confessing, I was the only individual that was charged. Therefore, I was taken to the juvenile detention center. Being the only one charged, the confession therefore really made no common sense due to the fact that it described other people committing the act with me only in the presence of those that set this fire that killed four people. Um, I would say approximately 2 months later, I was bonded over from the juvenile court system, which was generally known back then as a 702 transfer from the juvenile courts over to the adult courts. This meant that now the entire scheme of and consequences and penalties would change. This means that uh, it was no longer a option that I would spend inside of a juvenile center for months or maybe until my 21st birthday, but this meant that I could literally spend the rest of my life behind a prison wall. I was represented by two Cook County public defenders, one who had 1.5 years of experience, and the other one who had barely 2 years of experience. These were two Cook County public defenders, Robert Cooney and Brian Dosh, who were basically just outgunned and out resourced. I would say that they tried their best. The failure of these young attorneys were to get up and to adequately investigate the crime. They never investigated the crime, therefore missing witnesses that could have, back in 1982, when I was tried, could have testified to the fact that I did not commit this crime. They were credible sources, individuals that were there and present. Matter of fact, based off of the evidence that was gathered years down the road by other attorneys and attorneys out of Skadden Arts law firm and Northwestern University in the city of Chicago, it determined clearly that uh, many of the residents were out sitting on their porches or sitting in their cars or just walking the streets at 2 a.m. in the morning on this date of June 17th of 1981. And many people had seen the individuals who started the fire. However, due to the fact that the police never, ever once made any attempts to contact them, and the police basically shot down their attempt to basically reveal information to them that they knew who had committed this crime, then it was basically a slam dunk conviction with a confession of a young child. Well, being found guilty, I am the only individual out of Cook County, to my knowledge, and it could have changed. But back in 1981, I spoke to the judge for more than 2 hours and explaining to the judge, who was a African American judge by the name of William Cousins Jr. And I explained to him that, first of all, I never set a fire. I never killed anyone. I basically stated to the court that I watched the jury, steal my life. And the quote goes like this: Judge, I watched the police steal my youth, and now the jury has stolen my life. Well, they took these phrases, the media did, and they twisted it all around. Rosalind Rossi with the Chicago Sun-Times, she wrote a long article, and it was basically about the judge seeing two Mark Clementses, one that would help others in the community and one that would terrorize people in the community. And he basically used this crime as a example that, guess what? I committed the crime. Well, sitting literally inside of the Illinois Department of Corrections for 28 years of my life, and going to school and making some effort once leaving the prison system to try to put some type of effective voice behind prison conditions and the way that men and women were being treated by our criminal court system. You mean to tell me that here it is, a young child, and attorneys just basically tell this young child to just sit there and to remain quiet and the child have really no knowledge as to really truly what's taking place inside of the courtroom, other than just sitting there. And it was traumatizing to be found guilty by 11 whites and one African American, believing that, well, I committed this crime. Let me be clear. Uh, if I committed the crime, then that means that uh, the police, the prosecutors, as well as the judge, let the real perpetrators go free to get someone who literally just stood and watched. So basically, spending 28 years inside of a prison and then coming back out and watching the decay of this society. This is a society that is horrifying to individuals that have spent long terms behind prison walls. We find out that there is little to nothing to offer. That, in other words, there's no I would say, meaningful counseling. There's no meaningful opportunities for employment. There is no understanding of this society, and it is basically just involved around the same conditions that they're claiming the prisons to be. In other words, what I found out in my release is that uh, the conditions in this society is worse than inside of the prisons. And for lawmakers to enact penalties to impose against the most vulnerable individuals and say that they would die behind a prison wall as a young child, regardless if they're innocent or guilty, is barbaric and something that we, the people, we must stop. It only opens the door for individuals to be terrorized, victimized, and persecuted by a criminal justice system that literally use the skin of African Americans and brown peoples as way to victimize them, as way to apply black codes and discriminatory standards to ensure that the truth not be revealed in a ring of detectives that literally tortured individuals. Being a young kid, and they would transfer me from the juvenile detention center, which was located then at 1100 South Hamilton, and now today it's located on Ogden. And being transferred from the juvenile detention center over to the Cook County Court building, what I would see sometimes it terrorized me. It terrorized me. It traumatized me to see grown people taken inside of courtrooms, and they look like mummies. And to find out that we had a criminal justice system that asked not one question as to how the individual sustained injuries. That's mind blowing. And it's troublesome to send children through systems which everyone know have loopholes, and those loopholes are very costly loopholes. Well, my release primarily to my mother, Virginia Clements, and someone that I must recognize as giving her life that I may have life and may have opportunity to basically mobilize, to fight against, and to basically stand with many different families likewise that had been tortured. I first learned of the fact that it was a ring of Chicago police torturing suspects. And let me rephrase that again. I first learned that other men, were victims of police torture just like me. I learned that from behind prison walls. And I began to learn that when I spoke with a brother by the name of Alfonso Travis and another one by the name of Gregory Smith. Both of them were taken to Area 3 Violent Crimes Unit. Both of them basically described what took place with me inside of the police station. So now being someone that was considered as a rookie paralegal working for the Borough Oak Library System and being basically acquainted and having opportunity to reach out to many different attorneys, and one of them being Alan Mills of the Uptown People's Law Center, uh, it made a difference. But prisons begin to change and they begin to traumatize. And this was, please forgive me, this was done as the result of a tape being released that showed a alleged serial killer, Richard Speck, having sex with at least one or two different inmates, using cocaine and having money. Allegedly, this outraged lawmakers. It outraged lawmakers to the fact that lawmakers basically they retaliated against the inmates for what the correction staff permitted individuals that were locked up to do. They permitted uh, inmates to have, at least certain ones, to have video recording material. And now this tape being released and being tied into the fact that one of the men that was at least indicted along with Larry Hoover was using this tape to attempt to sell it over to media so that he could hire legal counsel. It was to be sold to Bill Curtis over at CBS Channel 2. Bill Curtis broke the story how prison guards basically permitted Richard Speck to do these things. However, it was not very many correctional guards reprimanded for their conduct. The inmates were literally terrorized by corrections as legislators, one being Tom Dart, by the way, who is now the sheriff over at the Cook County Jail. They implemented rules and they implemented procedures that literally terrorized human beings behind prison walls for the failure of the Illinois Department of Corrections to do its job. Just because this was shown in a video, prison officials felt the need to therefore dismantle everything, every program. They locked down all the prisons. They basically took away every piece of property away from inmates. Matter of fact, many inmates were taken from their prison cells buck naked, meaning literally naked, and they were chained to fences on the outside of the cell house. meaning being placed and handcuffed to fences inside of the prison yard. This was human rights violations that were literally allowed and permitted by Illinois state legislators and state senators due to the fact that no one liked Richard Speck because he was accused of killing some student nurses and he was hated. Well, yes, he was viewed as a serial killer. Yes, the tape was made and it was Richard Speck. However, Richard Speck had died before the video even surfaced. And for prison officials to literally terrorize the inmates due to the fact that they faced, uh, I would say, harsh possibilities of being terminated from their positions, and to watch a Jim Egger, who was the governor at that time, basically revealed to society that he was going to make uh, inmate lives miserable and that he would hire psychiatrists to come up with 100 ways to basically make the lives of inmates miserable as possible as the result of this tape being released. Well, may I say that 99.9.9.9% had nothing to do with this tape, but they were all terrorized by corrections and remain this day to be terrorized. And as we are going through this coronavirus, what we are finding out is that they are still being terrorized behind prison walls, even in the year of 2020. Well, I was a individual that was fortunate enough to gain legal representation from Skadden Arts and through Northwestern University School of Law. Um, Immediately, the case read, it was filed, but it revealed those flaws immediately upon attorneys beginning to investigate. I still recall back in 2007 of December, these attorneys coming down to the prison to interview me. It was four different attorneys, and they were very careful in their interview of me to basically begin to investigate the facts and circumstances of what led to my incarceration. They told me that generally their investigations would take 6 months, to be patient and just, basically preoccupy your mind with something so that, I wouldn't be bugged out waiting on them to complete their investigation. I had knowledge of the fact that it would take some time for Skadden Arts to complete its investigation. Well, the very next day, I was informed that I had a legal call, and I didn't know who it really was, but I was told to get dressed and that I had to go for a legal call. The call was placed, and I therefore uh, stated my name. They accepted the charges of the call, and they told me that they had some good news and some bad news. I was always prone to bad news. So I told them that I wanted to hear the bad news first. They told me that they had unearthed some new information that they felt that they could free me from prison, but it would take them some time to do it. They then informed me that they had went out to the community of over at 66 in Wentworth, and that going to the community immediately, people were willing to talk to them. Those people basically explained that a motorcycle gang out of Detroit, Michigan, who were known as the Monsters Motorcycle Gang, had retaliated against the Scott family due to the fact that the Scott's family was known as a family of drugs, and they sold drugs out of a store that they owned in this building. It was three apartments on the second floor of this building. One of those apartments, a person by the name of Rufus Scott lived on the second floor. On also the second floor rear was a person by the name of Kenneth Ross. And the other individual was a individual that him and his wife lived there. And they had at least one friend over visiting, as well as there was a known alcoholic that was in the hallway when one individual appeared and began to throw Molly cocktails into the vestibule. They described that this individual who had done this had called out to Rufus Scott as he was throwing these bottles filled with gasoline into the stairwell. Well, there was a man by the name of Robert T. Watson. Robert T. Watson was a individual that was he served time, not time, but he served his duty in the military. And when returning back from military duties, he was a individual that couldn't adjust. He had suffered all sorts of mental deficiency issues, and he would drink all the time. He was someone who had a facial appearance as being someone at maybe 60 years old, despite the fact that he was a 42-year-old male, African American. Um, in the confession, it states that I stated that we beat a boy. None of the victims in this crime was a boy. The youngest being, the youngest being Robert T. Watson. It also stated that we cut this boy because each and every time that he would jump up and down, each and every time he would miss from jumping up and down, gasoline was thrown on his pants. It states that we then poured gasoline down the stairwell and then a match was lit. And basically, that contributed to the factor that the police needed. And this was their theory that they had told me to basically state to the Cook County State's Attorney. His name was Kevin Moore. Well, basically, nothing made sense about this crime. They stated that they had recovered fingerprints that belonged to me. They were partial prints on at least one of two bottles that they recovered from the scene. The confession states that it was 4 people, 3 bottles, and that all 4 perpetrators had a bottle apiece. Maybe you didn't hear me clearly. The confession states that it was 4 perpetrators and 3 bottles, and that all 4 perpetrators had a bottle apiece. This confession raised no red flag in the criminal court system. It raised no red flag upon any law enforcement, upon the Illinois Children and Family Services that were basically hired to protect the interests of children. It raised no red flag at all. Well, DNA testing revealed the fingerprints did not belong to me, they belonged to members of the Chicago Police Department. uh, Testing upon a box cutter knife that was recovered from me when I was arrested revealed no blood on it at all, despite the fact that prosecutors introduced it into evidence as being relevant to the crime, stating that blood had been found on the knife. So, in totality, taking the confession, stating that the knife had blood on it, stating that my fingerprints was partially on the bottle, is a slam dunk conviction. Scat art investigators were able to determine, as they followed the procedures of DNA testing, that the fingerprints on the bottle belonged to members of the Chicago Police Department, and that the knife absolutely 100% had no blood on it at all. Evidence began to surface that Ramona Patton had at least fingered 3 other individuals within that week to the Chicago Police Department, stating that they committed this crime. It was learned that the building owners had at least offered a reward to anyone that could offer information and to the arrest and conviction of a person that was responsible for this crime. Well, Ramona Patton did not receive that reward. And one of the reasons why Ramona Patton did not receive that reward is because the building owners clearly knew who committed the crime. They were openly and able to basically express their narrative through a uncle who was a police officer. And as the result of having this uncle that was a police officer, most apparently he was able to convince that Rufus Scott had never, played a role in this crime. Well, what was overlooked is that NBC Channel 5 reporter Paul Hogan was outside of this fire scene, reporting this fire to the NBC viewers when someone walked up to him and gave him a note. That note stated, Jay has been burned out of Detroit, Michigan. It is drug related, and and Rufus is responsible. Well, the police claimed that they questioned Rufus Scott, but they didn't go into details as to what that questioning entailed. Rufus Scott was never viewed as a suspect, even despite the fact that his own sister, Marsha Scott, revealed to members of the Chicago Police Department that she felt that her brother was directly responsible for this crime. Well, after investigation and now Scadden Arts and its investigators probing the community around 6600 South Wentworth in Chicago, Illinois, they were able to gather the fact that not only did the residents know who committed this crime, but the fact that Rufus Scott had basically sold the Munster Street Gang B12 protein powder for a substance of drugs that they had purchased, and that the fire was really in connection with another fire that had been started at this same location. And that fire had started on June the 7th in the rear of this apartment building, which had the store on the first floor. Once that was revealed, sources as to who was directly responsible for this crime was therefore revealed to counsel. Um, and as a result, it strengthened the claims of the post conviction petition. In the year of 2009 of April, my attorneys sought, that means that they went before the court and they asked the judge to please remove my case from the cases that were being handled by members of the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. My case was assigned over to a special prosecutor by the name of Stuart Noodleman. Noodleman almost immediately voiced some form of outrage. Noodleman is one that called the arrest as well as parts of the police tactics unconstitutional. Uh, we deal with a system that don't like to confess once it has wronged someone. Well, my convictions were overturned. That meant that all four murders, including the arson, was overturned. With one of the murders being reinstated, that would mean that I would leave out of the prison system that day as time served, and that prison officials could no longer hold me past 5:30 that evening. Being released was a happy moment. It was a moment of just great solidarity by many different people with the Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, along with the campaign to end the death penalty, and the Independent Socialist Workers Party, the ISO. Many of them, they stood with me. Being voiceless, uh, I was just amazed of the great work that the mothers did and speaking up for their children that were locked up, one being my mother, and to find out that now she was sick, she was dying. So basically, my reward out of the prison system would be returning back to a society, to a dying mother, to return back to a society that was basically born, to return back to a society that basically I thought I understood, but I did not fully understand. I give thanks to Bernadine Duran for all that she has done for me. Bernadine Doran is, at least was, the director over the Children and Family Justice Center over at Northwestern University. She's someone that solely believed in me, my innocence. She stood by me all the way. And she's an individual that she gave me her promise inside of a prison interview room. And she told me, she said, Mark, I'm going to try to help you. She said that I think that we can get you uh, good counsel. And she said that I'm going to do my best to get you home. And I want to thank Bernadine for her hard work, something that literally she did not have to do, but she did do it. And being released and being in her midst and being able to stand on the battlefield and fighting against John Burge and fighting against just this crooked system in which it has basically used natural life sentencing of youth as a tool to silence them, and to see that some of these men that the system literally said that they would never come home. They're home. And it took a lot of work. And it took so much work that it burnt me out in that particular field in fighting for our young youth to come home. The same is true in fighting around the Burge cases, being burnt out and then fighting uh, for men and women that were on death row. That was my job, to fight for them, to give them a voice, to basically to echo their cry for help. And the bottom line of it is that I feel that I did the best job that I could possibly do. I consulted with my mother and I asked her just three wishes. Just give me three wishes. What would you like to see me accomplish? And her first choice was to see John Burge held accountable for his tortures. Unfortunately, John Burge was never held fully accountable for his tortures. However, it opened the door for John Burge to be uh, charged and tried and later convicted for perjury and obstruction of justice, in which he lied in a federal court document that he had never tortured in any individual inside of police stations. So you probably say, well, they charged him for perjury and obstruction of justice. Why they didn't charge him for the actual tortures? Well, the statute of limitations expired on that charge. So John Burge literally escaped the true penalty that he deserved. But basically mobilizing and mobilizing with the masses of so many great people and literally all around the globe, and being thankful of the campaign to end the death penalty to give me an opportunity to basically fly all around and to open my mouth against this crooked criminal justice system. One of the dark eras being when uh, going to Georgia and mobilizing around the Troy Davis case and watching how an evil criminal justice system refused to accept the fact that a innocent man was on death row, and putting all of my strength and all of my power behind trying to save him, listening to people that had been uh, organizers and mobilizing around Troy Davis case, and many of them opting out to remain silent doing a vigil for Troy Davis. It angered me. It angered me because I could see myself in that cage, and I'm speaking out to the people about, hey, I'm innocent, but you want to be silent. So I think that many people started to see uh, just basically that I would not remain silent. I remember how so many individuals inside of this office for the NAACP that we gathered in Atlanta, Georgia, and Amnesty office, and to just listen to these people agree to remain silent. To remain silent? You know, why did I come to Georgia? And it wasn't to remain silent. It was to basically stick it to the system and let the system know that, guess what? Let our people go. Let this man return rightfully back to his family. Unfortunately, Troy had been charged and convicted of killing a Savannah, Georgia police officer. And I think it was 9 witnesses who allegedly fingered him. That was the evidence. That's it. 9 witnesses fingered him. 7 of them recanted, and they revealed stories to Troy's investigators and to journalists that had been investigating Troy's claims of innocence. That, well, while they were at the police station, they were terrorized. They were basically put under the gun that, listen here, if you don't finger him, then what we're going to do is either we're going to violate you for a violation of parole, or what we are going to do is we're just going to simply say you did it. So they fingered Troy Davis. Troy Davis was found guilty. And want me to tell you, the court recognized them as being credible then. But when they reversed and they stated that they had been terrorized and victimized and coerced by police officers of the Savannah Police Department, then the court no longer took them to be credible. So it shows that we have a systemic racist criminal justice system, and where that they are so quick to basically impose the death penalty upon someone. And when they have been basically exposed, they still leave you to suffer. And that's what happened to Troy Davis. Uh, you know, one thing amazing about this is that it was the vocal point of my young organizing career. And really, I took it personal. I knew his sister, I knew members of his family. Uh, and, you know, I wanted to at least bring this brother home. Well, we organized through the Georgia State as well as Georgia University. And I had no idea, not at all, that speaking to these people would generate and spark such attention. It sparked where that we were able to gather, man, thousands of people. Thousands of people got up. People came from Florida. I remember people coming from Florida. People came from Indiana. People came from Chicago, of course, Milwaukee. People came all the way from California. And I remember when we were walking down the streets of Georgia screaming, no, no justice, no peace. No justice, no peace. And as we were going through there, we're heading to this park where this organization has masses of people giving a quiet, silent vigil. Here it is, this little African American guy who barely had been out of prison is now going up against the big group, telling them, we're not going to do that. We're going to make some noise. And we took it to the street. I could see Dexter King, the son of Dr. King, as he seen us. He left his church and he had to come out and he joined us. And the crowds were just, as we would go by the blocks, they would just, I'm talking about, get bigger and bigger as we chatted, brick by brick, wall by wall, free Troy Davis, free them all, brick by brick, wall by wall, free Troy Davis, free them all. And to just see the intent of these young kids standing, all races, and we headed to the park. And come on. And we went, and we went, and we went. And I could see the people, they looked at us as they were frightened, like, they looked at us because we were making noise. I watched an ambulance come by, and in the ambulance was Al Sharpton because he couldn't get down the streets. So they put him in the ambulance to bring him to this church where that this big rally was going to be held for Troy Davis. Well, we got there and the drums stopped, the horns stopped, the people stopped, and we looked at them. And if there's never any time in my life that I was serious when I said, come on, that was then. And we moved and we went through that crowd. And as we began to chat, brick by brick, wall by wall, free Troy Davis, free them all. And we surrounded all of them. They had no choice but to surrender. So this big group who was literally receiving millions and millions and millions of dollars. Yes, their option was to now turn us into the criminals and to now want to run up into the church. They set a policy that no one can bring any protest signs into the church. So that was their first way of trying to deny us access into the church. I could recall Darby Tillis basically speaking outrage as to whose side are these people on. Darby Tillis, Illinois' first death row exoneree, he voiced anger. You know, how in the world, how dare you try to silence us? But that's what they did because they felt that the governor in Georgia would not basically grant a clemency if he had the opportunity to do so, if he saw the noisy people and the big crowds. And no, that was far from the truth. That was far from the truth. How in the world in America can a African American be put on death row and then you win his release through silence? Can't happen. Same way with these John Burge torture cases. They can't be won through silence. This is something that has affected the city of Chicago for nearly 50 years, where that we have seen men such as Virgil Robinson, who have been stuck inside of the Illinois Department of Corrections since 1977. And he can't gain any relief as a result of his torture due to the fact that he didn't confess. Now, how much common sense does that make? Because I didn't get my butt beat, I must stay in prison. Well, they set up all sorts of roadblocks, and some of these roadblocks are still in play right now today to try to prevent, hinder, and delay men from getting out of prisons. That's what they did. And yes, I take it personal. I take it very personal due to the fact that, first of all, I witnessed in my life a corrupt police department in conjunction with a corrupt prosecutor agency, in conjunction with a corrupt criminal justice system, steal my youth. They took all of my youth from me. So if you take someone's adolescence from them, chances are they're going to be crippled in basically their knowledge of society. So when I returned back into society, I thank God I had my moms. But I watched others who didn't have a mother, and they began to get victimized much more sooner than I became to get victimized. So the bottom line of it is no justice have come. Chicago police torture reparations in the city of Chicago literally goes down in our history as a start, but a joke. It goes down to paralyzing and crippling the lives of individuals that had to spend so long inside of prisons. It goes down in the history book as a tool that was basically meaningfulless in the lives of so many individuals that it affected. Torture reparations applies or it applied to 57 different cases. Uh, the things that we were told that would bear fruit in this package never bared fruit. It is getting better, but it has never truly bared the fruit that it ought to. And one of uh, the structures of the center has to be to take young brothers and sisters who return back from the prison systems who have been wounded for so long in their lives and to begin to teach them to reintegrate back into this society. None of that occurred. So it opens the door for less dignified people to attack individuals like we don't know. So when you come out, you see good in everyone. You're just saying, well, hey, man, listen here, man. I'm so happy I'm out of that rat hole. You fail to realize that you talking to the real criminal. And that's the way that this society has turned out to so many of us that were locked behind prison walls. And the conclusion of this video, I have been targeted by the FOP, the Fraternal Order of Police. Not the first time, and it will probably not be the last time. We as a people, we must understand that we have allowed a criminal justice system to enact punitive laws that literally have handcuffed people from young ages. Now we are crying that it be taken back. And in our cry that it be taken back, we have struggled to have democratic elected people to take back something that they claim that they would have never stood for in the first place. They have used torture victims and survivors as if they are pawns. And the same is true. How dare you allow for crooked cops to get on witness stands and to testify and not charge them once you know that their testimony is not credible? It has literally opened the door as the next genocide of our society. Wrongful convictions have served as a way to hold and to basically hinder the lives and the growth of so many Black and brown people. But many people, they hear, but they don't hear. People, change must come through forcing elected officials to do their jobs and to follow the Constitution. They have not measured out the Constitution in a fair manner towards individuals that were tortured. Torture reparations in the city of Chicago only opened the door for many in the community to victimize the survivors. And I think that really many people fail to clearly acknowledge that. Anytime you tattoo their faces on television and you tell a audience, viewers all over the entire world that they have been compensated, it opens the door for wrong people to enter into your lives. Until we as a people begin to understand that there are still 100 plus men and women that remain to linger behind prison walls, such as Stanley Howard, such as Gerald Reed, still remain to linger behind prison walls. Stanley Howard has spent 36 years behind a prison wall. Gerald Reed has spent 30 years behind a prison wall. Enough is enough when we even look at the fact of a young 13-year-old Marcus Wiggins taken down to the police station and terrorized. But police, the city of Chicago under Lori Lightfoot, wants to now give a narrative that tortures never occurred inside of Area 2 and 3 violent crime units. That's an insult. And that's an insult that must be addressed. It's an insult that the people must address to Lori Lightfoot as to where is her morals. You have literally watched your people be assassinated, terrorized, and downtrodden by members of the police department. And how dare you say that Stanley Rice was not tortured? How you dare say that Mr. Tyrone Hood was not tortured, or James Gibson was not tortured. We must continue to fight. And as I say, free Gerald Reed, we must continue to fight. As I say, free Javan Deloney, we must continue to fight. As I say, free Antonio Porter, we must continue to fight. As I say, free Antonio Nicholas, we must continue to fight. As I say, free them all, that represents us all standing up and doing our duty and responsibility to expose the systemic racist cops that carried out these tortures. Guevara, Renato Guevara, must be charged for his acts of framing individuals inside of interrogation rooms. He must be charged for his torture. He must be charged for his acts of genocide. We as a people and as a nation and as taxpayers cannot afford to continuously pay detectives that basically terrorized us, terrorized our children, our families, and entire communities. We must figure it out. We must stand in unity together. And on May 16th, you must get up. Torture survivors must be represented. Torture survivors must be given credibility. Torture survivors must be provided with all of the tools so that they can live wholesome lives. Thank you. God bless you. Let's keep the fight going. As I stated, free Gerald Reed, free Stanley Howard, free them all. God bless you.